The behavior of people who have suffered too much in life, silent battles. There are wounds we carry not on our skin, but deep within, the ones invisible to the world yet powerful enough to shape our every step. You may look at someone and see strength, distance, or coldness. But behind that facade could be a heart quietly battling old, unhealed sorrows. In today's journey, we will uncover the hidden ways that pain shapes our existence, and more importantly, how we can walk the path toward healing, authenticity, and inner freedom. Stay with us. Sometimes, the most important battles are the silent ones, and understanding them is the first step to reclaiming your life. When pain silently changes the way we exist, there are people who, at first glance, seem cold, distant, and hard to approach. Yet few realize that behind that exterior, they are simply trying to protect themselves from old wounds that have never had the chance to heal. Pain, when it is neither heard nor healed, silently alters the way a person shows up in the world. And the saddest part is, almost no one notices. According to Carl Jung, when pain is not understood, it does not disappear. It hides, slipping into the deepest layers of the soul, eventually manifesting outward as behaviors that are difficult to explain. People begin to build invisible walls, weaving layers of armor made of silence, of suspicion, of broken connections. Not because they don't want to love, but because love once hurt them so deeply that they can no longer bear it. The behaviors that the world easily labels as cold, distant, or unlovable are, in fact, survival strategies that a wounded soul is forced to adopt. When pain has no place to be felt, it does not simply vanish, it transforms into a defense mechanism, becoming so entwined with the person's identity that even they may no longer notice it. Over time, the armor becomes so familiar that it seems to merge with their own skin. But beneath it all still lies a heart trembling from unhealed memories. Carl Jung once said, "Pain is the coin with which the soul pays for awakening." He did not romanticize suffering, but saw it as an essential part of expanding consciousness. Pain, when listened to with respect and understanding, reveals not only where we have been hurt but also where we have forgotten how to live fully. Thus, those who have endured too much do not simply change because of time. They change because pain has taught them how to survive, even at the cost of softness. Even if they must hurriedly stitch together the tears in their soul with whatever they can find. They do not choose to be cold. They only choose the way that hurts less. To truly understand these individuals, we must learn to look deeper than the surface. We must understand that every distant action, every closed-off gesture, is not a rejection but a silent cry from wounds that were never named. And if we are patient enough to listen, we may realize that behind that silence is a small, fragile plea: please, don't hurt me again. Pain that goes unheard, when defense becomes a way of life. Not everyone is fortunate enough to grow up in an environment where emotions are heard and respected. For those who have experienced deep wounds, pain is not merely a sad memory, it becomes a living entity that shapes how they live, how they love, and how they defend themselves against the world. When such wounds are not met with understanding, they do not dissolve, instead, they silently seep into every behavior, every unconscious reaction. Carl Jung pointed out that when pain is denied or unacknowledged, it finds other ways to exist. Sometimes it shows up as coldness in the eyes, interruptions in the voice, or endless silences in relationships. The outside world often sees these outer layers and quickly judges: distant, indifferent, unfeeling. But few are sensitive enough to realize that these are just masks the soul must wear in order to survive in a world that once hurt it too deeply. When there is no safe space to express emotions, people are forced to develop survival strategies. These strategies not only shield them from new wounds but also conceal the old ones that never healed. Over time, they dig deep into the psychological structure, turning into habits, into automatic reflexes that even the person themselves may struggle to recognize. They are no longer simply being cautious, they live in a state of vigilance as a natural part of their being. We often hastily label these defensive behaviors with harsh words: hard to approach, hard to love, cold. But in truth, every withdrawn gesture is a vital survival instinct built from the most fundamental need, to avoid being hurt again. Defense becomes a prerequisite for existence. A mechanism the soul creates in moments when it realizes that no one else can protect it. Understanding this changes the way we perceive those who seem tough and aloof. We begin to see that sometimes, their silence is not rejection but an unconscious whisper. I am still trying to learn to trust again. And only when we are patient enough not to impose, gentle enough not to demand, can we touch the most vulnerable corners within them, the places where trust is waiting to be quietly reborn. Invisible complexes, when reactions are echoes of old wounds. There are times when we see someone react excessively to seemingly small things: an offhand comment, a cold glance, a minor delay. It's easy to judge them as overly sensitive, weak, even irrational. But few understand that behind those reactions lie invisible complexes, formed from old wounds that still simmer deep within the soul. Carl Jung called these structures, complexes, clusters of unresolved emotions buried in the unconscious, carrying a life of their own. When a current situation inadvertently echoes an old pain, these complexes are instantly activated. They do not ask for our conscious permission. Nor do they give us time to reflect. They hijack our entire reaction, plunging us into intense emotional states that even we ourselves do not fully comprehend. A person who was once rejected, perhaps even silently, may carry a complex of abandonment. Years later, a missed message or a delayed response may be enough to unleash all the old pain. They are not reacting to the present moment, they are reacting to an unhealed memory. The anger, hurt, and insecurity we see are actually echoes from a distant past where their soul was wounded in ways it could not forget. These complexes are not faults. They are survival mechanisms, built during the most vulnerable moments when the ego was not strong enough to endure the pain alone. When a complex takes over, it does not act out of malice but out of a blind attempt to protect us from repeating old wounds. Yet this blind protection traps us, causing us to overreact and robbing us of the ability to live fully in the present. The greatest danger is not in having complexes, it is in not realizing they are controlling us. When a complex is triggered, we no longer act as the mature adults we are. We act as the wounded children we once were. And until we are brave enough to listen to these echoes and ask, what pain within me is crying out, we will continue to be unconsciously led by them. Healing begins with awareness. With the shift from asking, why am I so weak, to asking, what pain in me needs care. When we sit with our own excessive reactions with kindness, we cease to be victims of the past. We become caretakers of our most wounded parts, and that is the first step to breaking free from the invisible loops that these complexes have quietly built. When loss of trust becomes a survival shield, there is a silent truth. Those who struggle to trust are not lacking in love, it is because love once broke them. In the painful years when they placed their complete trust, they were met with betrayal, abandonment, or cold silence. And so, gradually, trust stopped being a simple gift to offer. It became a risk, a gamble where the price could be their very own heart. Carl Jung emphasized that the human psyche cannot distinguish between past and present in the depths of the unconscious. When a wound has not healed, any present situation carrying a familiar echo can trigger a defensive reaction. A cold look, a prolonged silence, or even just a temporary absence, is enough for the mind to believe it is being abandoned once again. Thus, those who have been deeply wounded often build invisible walls around themselves. They analyze every word, scrutinize every gesture, and anticipate disappointments to brace themselves before others have the chance to hurt them. They do not want to live in doubt. But they are even more unwilling to be stabbed in the back once again by the very trust they once gave away. Loss of trust is not a choice. It is a survival instinct honed through pain. Every time they trusted and were betrayed, the soul learned another lesson: don't be caught off guard. Don't open up too easily. This vigilance becomes a filter for every relationship, and sometimes, they even imagine threats where none exist, simply because they fear being hurt once again. However, this defensive mechanism, though it once saved them, gradually turns into a wall that keeps them from forming genuine connections. When you are constantly bracing for betrayal, you leave no room to feel kindness. When you are always expecting abandonment, you no longer allow yourself to enjoy presence. And so, in the attempt to avoid pain, they also cut themselves off from the pure joy of real connection. Healing begins with the realization that not everyone is like those who once hurt them. Not every moment is a repetition of old tragedies. When someone dares to pause in the wave of doubt, dares to ask, am I reacting to the present or to a memory, in that very moment, they open up an opportunity. An opportunity to let trust grow again, not with naivete, but with the deep courage of someone who has once lost everything and still chooses to love the world once more. Inner isolation, a self-protection instinct or an invisible prison. There are times in life when the world becomes too noisy, too chaotic, too cruel, leaving the human soul with only one choice: to withdraw. Isolation does not stem from arrogance or coldness, as outsiders often assume. It arises from a deep instinct of self-protection, where the wounded soul seeks to preserve the remaining fragments of itself. Carl Jung once compared inner withdrawal to a symbolic process of death and rebirth. When the outside world becomes too dangerous, too unpredictable, the soul is forced to shrink inward, retreating within itself as a silent mechanism for healing. In the darkness of isolation, the soul quietly patches its cracks, reorganizing itself so that one day, it may return to life. But just like physical wounds, if the protective phase lasts too long, healing turns into paralysis. When isolation becomes a habit, when the inner walls grow thicker, the instinct for self-protection transforms into a prison. Initially, isolation is a safe refuge. Later, it becomes chains that imprison the ability to connect and to feel life. Those who live too long in isolation forget how to trust, how to open up, how vulnerability is a natural part of being human. They build layers of defense so thick that even they can no longer remember what it truly feels like to live. Silence becomes the only language, and distance becomes the only way to feel safe. The hardest part is that from the outside, few recognize the pain hidden behind this distance. The world only sees the gaps, the polite nods, the indifferent smiles. Few understand that behind every cautious gesture is a soul carefully testing each step, afraid that any closeness could lead to new wounds. Healing does not mean tearing down all defensive walls at once. It begins by acknowledging a simple truth: there was a time when we needed isolation to survive. And at the same time, recognizing that today, perhaps we no longer have to hide. When we allow ourselves to slowly step out of that cocoon of isolation, with gentleness and patience toward ourselves, we discover that this world, despite its imperfections, still holds safe spaces where we can breathe, live, and love once again. Persona, when the social mask becomes a prison for the soul. We all wear masks. A mask is not a lie, it is an essential part of surviving in society. It helps us adapt, connect, and protect the most fragile parts of ourselves. But for those who have endured too much pain, the mask becomes not just a tool but a prison, a hidden cage that traps their true self. Carl Jung called this the persona, the social face we present to the world. Initially, the persona is just a protective layer, shielding our vulnerabilities from cold gazes. But when wounds are too deep and the outside world too harsh, people begin to identify completely with the mask. They no longer merely use the persona to interact, they live inside it, forgetting who they truly are behind it. Those with a heavily fortified persona often appear very strong. They seem unshaken by failures, resilient in the face of loss. Unwilling to show emotions easily. They know how to smile at the right moment, how to answer appropriately. How to seem fine even when they are breaking inside. But the price of that perfection is a devastating loneliness. For the better they are at hiding, the less they are truly understood. And the less they are understood, the deeper they imprison themselves within walls of their own making. Living too long inside the persona causes people to lose touch with themselves. They no longer dare ask, "How do I truly feel?" or "What do I truly want?" They only know how to appear strong, so that no one can see the fragile parts within. But the soul cannot breathe forever in such a sealed space. Sooner or later, cracks begin to form. Sooner or later, no matter how hard they try, the mask can no longer cover the hollowness that gnaws at them from within. Healing does not mean throwing away the persona. For we still need some protection in society. Healing means learning to use the persona as a tool, not as a prison. It means daring to remove the mask when it is safe. Daring to show our true self to those who are trustworthy. It means learning to distinguish between who I am and who I am expected to be. And when we dare to live true to ourselves, even if imperfectly, we begin to taste freedom, the kind of freedom no mask, no matter how strong, could ever provide. Excessive empathy, saving others to escape oneself. There are certain people who always show up just when others are in pain. They listen, comfort, and understand so deeply that they make you feel as though you found a safe haven in this cold world. But few realize that sometimes, behind that unconditional tenderness lies an unhealed wound. Some people learn to care for others not because they have healed themselves, but because saving others allows them to momentarily forget their own scars. Carl Jung described this mechanism as a form of projection. When painful emotions are not processed internally, instead of facing them, people tend to seek reflections of themselves in the suffering of others. Caregiving then becomes a sophisticated form of escape. They forget their own needs, pouring all their energy into healing others, hoping that in doing so, their own pain might also be soothed. Excessive empathy is not pure altruism. It is a beautiful yet dangerous act because it pulls people away from themselves. Those who empathize too much continuously prioritize others' needs over their own, sacrifice personal boundaries, and endure emotional exhaustion without even realizing it. They tell themselves it is love, when in reality, they are running away from confronting their own inner emptiness. The cruel irony is that the world praises those who are always willing to give and understand. They become the pillars others lean on, yet inside, they are souls growing increasingly depleted and hollow. No one sees the exhaustion accumulating after each act of endurance. No one knows that the more they save others, the farther they drift from the urgent need to save themselves. Healing in this case does not mean ceasing to care for others, but learning how to love mindfully. It means recognizing that genuine empathy begins with tending to one's own emotions first. That we can only truly be present for others when we are also present for ourselves. That carrying others' pain does not make us nobler, it only deepens the wounds of both. Healing is learning to place a hand on our own heart before reaching out to the world. It is understanding that true presence comes not from self-sacrifice, but from inner stability. When we listen to, understand, and love ourselves, empathy no longer becomes an act of escape but a pure gift, given without losing ourselves on the journey of love. Loving with caution, when love wears the armor of defense. There are people who, even when their hearts still flutter, love cautiously, as if every step closer is also a step nearer to an abyss. They are not lacking in affection. They are not indifferent. But deep down, love for them is not just a connection, it is also a danger. A latent threat capable of awakening old wounds they spent a long time covering up. When a soul has been deeply hurt in love, It learns to love with an invisible armor. They still feel, they still long, but they always maintain a safe distance. Any sign of distance, coldness, even a random delay in a message, is enough to reignite old fears. In their inner world, love means taking a risk, facing the possibility of being left behind once again. Carl Jung pointed out that unhealed complexes often manifest most strongly in intimate relationships. In the very place that should be the safest. The ghosts of the past reveal themselves most clearly. A glance, a word, a minor shift in someone's tone can unconsciously be inflated into a signal of betrayal. It is not because they distrust the other, but because they are battling their own memories. When loving with caution, the soul cannot fully relax. This silent vigilance creates a constant, invisible tension in the relationship. Part of them is always ready to withdraw. Always keeps a silent escape route, bracing for the collapse that might come without warning. The paradox is that this fear of loss gradually erodes the very connection they crave. Love, if controlled too tightly, suffocates. Trust, if not nurtured by full presence, cracks. And the one who yearned for connection most becomes the one who unknowingly pushes happiness away. Healing here does not mean tearing down all defenses overnight. It begins by clearly recognizing one's own reactions. Am I responding to the person before me? Or to an unhealed wound from the past? It means learning to differentiate between present emotions and the echoes of old hurts. When we start to believe that not every love leads to loss, not every closeness ends in betrayal, then love no longer needs to wear heavy armor. It can breathe. It can blossom, not out of protection, but from trust that has slowly been restored. Silent strength, when resilience becomes the only way to survive. There are people who carry within them a silent strength, unshowy, needing no applause. They do not boast about what they have endured. They simply keep moving forward, day after day. As if the storms had never knocked them down, or as if rising after every fall were the only natural thing to do. But behind that resilience is not a free choice. It is survival. When the world gave them no shoulder to lean on, they were forced to become their own support. Carl Jung once said that the moments when we lose all external supports are when the ego must seek strength deep within. When there is no one left to call upon. The human soul begins to tap into a hidden source from the deepest layers of being. That strength is not loud. It is not built on grand declarations, but on countless silent battles. On long nights of comforting oneself with nothing but the fragile rhythm of one's own breath. Those who survive great pain often do not realize how strong they are. They only know they must keep going. They learn to stitch their hearts together with the roughest needles. They learn to swallow their tears. To offer the world a light smile while a raging ocean churns within. And because they have grown so used to carrying everything alone, they gradually become formidable fortresses, impenetrable and self-sufficient. Yet, this silent strength also carries a price. Growing too accustomed to standing alone. They forget that vulnerability is a natural part of being human. They fear needing someone. They fear opening their hearts to accept help. Because for them, dependence equals failure. Equals the risk of being hurt once again. Healing does not mean abandoning that strength. It means understanding that true strength is not about always standing tall. It is also about knowing when to allow oneself to fall, to lean on others without seeing it as weakness. It is about believing that there are places, there are people, where softness is not exploited. Where vulnerability does not mean inevitable abandonment. When the soul no longer has to fight alone, when the heart no longer has to hide each fragile beat. That strength transforms from lonely fortitude into the foundation for a mature, resilient, and gentler self. Overthinking, when thinking becomes an escape from feeling. In a world that glorifies rationality, those with sharp analytical minds are often praised. But sometimes, behind that appearance of intelligence lies a silent fear, the fear of feeling. Those who have endured deep wounds often seek refuge in their minds, using thinking as a fortress and reasoning as armor, because emotions, to them, have once been an unbearable source of pain. Carl Jung once warned that mere knowledge does not lead to transformation. Knowing is not enough, we must live. And to live means daring to feel, even when those feelings are pain, fear, or helplessness. However, for those who have been battered by the emotional realm, thinking becomes a survival strategy. Analysis replaces experience. Interpretation replaces listening. Understanding a problem replaces feeling its pain. They become people who always need answers. Every emotion must be explained. Every wound must fit into a rational framework. In doing so, they maintain a sense of control. In doing so, they avoid sinking into the raw, chaotic emotions they once found unbearable. But the price of that control is a life quietly drained of vitality. When we live only in our heads, the world feels distant. Every experience is analyzed, dissected, evaluated, but rarely fully felt. We know why we are hurting, but we do not allow ourselves to truly hurt. We understand why we are lonely, but we do not allow ourselves to truly feel that loneliness. Healing in this case is not about abandoning intellect, but about restoring balance between thinking and feeling. It is learning to allow the body to react naturally, allowing the heart to grieve, to soften, to ache, without immediately justifying or explaining it away. It is learning to be fully present with what is happening inside, without rushing to find an answer. Because some pain needs no reason. Some tears need no explanation. Some moments ask not for thought, but for feeling. And only when we dare to lower the fortress of thought can we truly open a path for deep, root-level healing. The wounded healer, learning to care for yourself amid caring for others. There are those who dedicate their lives to healing others. They become a refuge for sorrow, a shoulder for others' storms. They know how to listen, how to understand, how to soothe wounded souls. But sometimes, behind that unconditional gentleness lies a forgetting of the self. The wounded healer often forgets that in the journey of lifting others, they too need a place to lean on. Carl Jung once described the wounded healer, a healer who carries within them unhealed wounds. It is these painful experiences that grant them deep empathy. Yet these same wounds, if not acknowledged and cared for, silently drain them. Because when we care for others as a way to compensate for our own inner voids, we are not truly present, we are merely running away. The wounded healer easily falls into the spiral of unconditional giving. They give endlessly, carrying others' pain as if it were their own responsibility. They tell themselves that the more they give, the more worthy and needed they become. But the truth is, each time they forget the boundary between themselves and others, they push themselves into emotional exhaustion. They become invisible in their own story. The problem is not kindness itself. It is that the kindness is not rooted in self-love. When helping others becomes a way to avoid facing loneliness and lingering wounds inside, the healer gradually loses themselves on a path they believe to be noble. Healing here is about learning to return inward. It is recognizing that we have the right to care for ourselves first, even before caring for others. It is learning to differentiate between genuine compassion and unnecessary self-sacrifice. It is understanding that true love does not come from carrying every burden from being fully present with inner steadiness. When the wounded healer learns to cradle their own pain with tenderness, they no longer heal others to fill a void. They heal because they understand that true presence, both steadfast and gentle, is what truly lights the way for lost souls. Low expectations, when hope becomes a luxury. Some people step into life with hearts full of hope, hope for love, for kindness, for genuine connections. But after too many disappointments, after too many times of trusting and being abandoned, expectation ceases to be natural. It becomes too expensive, a risk they no longer dare to take. To avoid further pain. They learn to expect less, or not to expect at all. Carl Jung once said that the human soul naturally tends to expand, to seek connection. To long for a full life. But when that soul is wounded repeatedly, it begins to contract, as a survival reflex. Low expectations become a defense mechanism. If we expect nothing from anyone or anything, we cannot be disappointed. But the price of that safety is a life that is pale, lacking in deep and authentic experiences. When we stop expecting, we also stop opening our hearts. Relationships remain shallow. Beautiful opportunities are lost before they can bloom. We walk through life wrapped in a shell of resilience, but inside, there grows an expanding emptiness. Our belief in goodness fades, and with it, our ability to truly live diminishes. The problem is not about expecting too much or too little. It is about expecting with a heart still filled with unhealed wounds. When the fear of disappointment overshadows every desire for connection, we become lonely travelers in the world, always wary, always bracing for the worst even when there is no sign of it. Healing begins by allowing ourselves to hope again, but with a new awareness. Not with blind optimism that everything will always be good, but with a deep acceptance that life always carries risks. That sometimes we will be hurt, and that does not mean we were wrong to trust. That the value of loving, connecting, hoping lies not in the outcome but in the courage to live fully in each moment. When we understand that disappointment is not the death of hope, but merely a natural part of the journey, we open our hearts again. Not with old naivety, but with a sturdier faith. That even if there is pain, even if there is loss, we still deserve to fully experience the deepest human emotions. Unresolved past, living with invisible wounds. Not all pain ends when the event that caused it passes. Some wounds cling silently to the soul, like invisible hooks suspended in every breath. Every dream, every tiny decision. Those carrying such wounds walk among us, outwardly smiling, working, loving, but inside, they are bearing a weight no one can see. Carl Jung once said, "What we resist in the unconscious will control us as fate." The past, if not confronted and integrated, does not simply stay behind us as we wish. It seeps into every reaction, every relationship, every unformed dream. A cold glance, a careless word, a brief separation, any of these can awaken the sleeping wounds, pulling us back into unresolved pain. These invisible wounds do not need to be mentioned to exist. They manifest in the ways we hesitate to love, the ways we rush to leave before someone can disappoint us. The ways we shrink back even when our hearts crave closeness. They quietly direct our lives, like a script written long ago that we are unconsciously reenacting again and again. Many believe that time alone heals all wounds. But the truth is, time does not heal what is not acknowledged. Repression, denial, and ignoring only push the wounds deeper, rooting them even more firmly into the soul. They no longer appear as clear memories but become life patterns, persistent, nameless anxieties. Healing begins with the bravest act. Daring to face the past. Daring to admit that certain things hurt us so much we could hardly speak of them. Daring to name the loss, the betrayal, the loneliness, the despair we once experienced. And more importantly, daring to embrace all those broken parts as worthy of love, too. Only by walking through the darkness can we stop being controlled by it. The past will never disappear. But once it is acknowledged and integrated, it no longer drives our lives from behind. It becomes part of our story, but no longer the whole story. And then, we can truly step into the present with a freer soul. With a heart more open, even if it still bears scars, scars that no longer imprison us, but instead remind us of our own power of rebirth. Healing pain, walking through darkness to find the true self. There are pains that cannot, and should not, be forgotten. They exist as silent milestones in the journey of the soul's growth. Reminding us that we once lived, once loved, once hurt so deeply that we thought we could not recover. Yet from those cracks, the first light of awakening begins to glimmer. Carl Jung emphasized that the process of individuation, the journey of becoming one's true self, does not happen in spite of pain, but through it. We cannot enter the depths of our inner world if we continually run from our wounded parts. Only when we dare to return, to walk through the darkness, do we have the chance to touch the forgotten parts of our true being. Healing is not about erasing memories or denying what happened. It is a slow and courageous process where we gradually remove the armor we once donned to survive. Each time we sit with our pain without judgment, without rushing through it, we open a new space within ourselves, a space for forgiveness, for acceptance, for rebirth. Walking through pain is not to become a stronger, colder version of ourselves. It is to become a more complete person. A person who can embrace both light and shadow within without fear. A person who understands that true strength does not come from never falling, but from standing back up from the very place where we once shattered. When pain is no longer denied, when our wounded parts are no longer exiled from consciousness, we begin to feel a new freedom. A freedom not born of controlling life, but from deeply accepting that we do not need to be perfect to be worthy of love. We are worthy simply because we exist. Because we are striving to live true to ourselves moment by moment. And in that acknowledgement, we are no longer victims of what happened to us. We become the storytellers. The authors writing the next chapter of our lives with trembling but resolute hands. And someday, when we look back, we will see. Pain did not destroy us. It opened a door leading back to the true self we were always seeking, hidden right within the wounds we once tried to forget. Finding meaning after inner collapse. When everything falls apart, we often think we have lost it all. But some losses are not an end, they are a silent invitation, urging us to seek a deeper meaning in our lives. Some breakdowns do not come to destroy us, they come to open another door, a door leading to a more authentic existence. Carl Jung emphasized that an inner crisis is not a sign of failure but a necessary step in the soul's growth. When old dreams shatter, when illusions collapse, we are forced to face the rawest question, who am I, if not what once defined me? It is in that emptiness that true meaning begins to sprout. No longer cloaked by imposed expectations, no longer carried along by hollow external definitions, we finally have the chance to hear the faint but powerful call from within. Meaning in life is not something we find out there. It is awakened from our deep experience with existence itself, through pain, through joy, through loss and resurrection. Those who have endured profound collapse understand that meaning does not come from perfect wholeness. It comes from the ability to stand amidst the ruins, to look into the darkness and still believe in the light, to endure uncertainty and still live with the courage to open up to the world. Healing is inseparable from the search for meaning. When we allow ourselves not just to exist but to live consciously, every wound becomes a part of the complex symphony of life. We are no longer haunted by a need to erase the past or chase perfection. We learn to live with ourselves as ever-evolving beings, ever-expanding, ever-becoming. Meaning, ultimately, is not a fixed destination. It is how we walk, how we touch each moment with full presence. It is the gratitude for even the losses, for they have brought us closer to the true essence of who we are. Clearing social misconceptions, when psychological wounds need understanding, not judgment. In a world too rushed to truly listen, those carrying psychological wounds are often misunderstood more than they are understood. Their silence is mistaken for coldness. Their guardedness is labeled as unapproachability. Their hesitation and loving is branded as weakness. The world sees behaviors but rarely sees the stories behind those behaviors, stories that only those who have once fallen deeply can truly understand. Carl Jung pointed out that we cannot heal or grow if we continue to judge the vulnerable parts of ourselves and others. Yet the modern world, with its harsh pace and its invisible standards of success or strength, has caused many to forget that being wounded is a natural part of the human experience. No one walks through life with their heart completely unscathed. Labeling someone as too sensitive, too negative, or too complicated not only fails to help them heal but also pushes them deeper into their internal loneliness. Every judgment, even when unintended, acts like a small blade, carving deeper into their hidden belief that they are undeserving of understanding. And so, wounds that were already festering silently decay even further. Understanding others does not require us to agree with them. It requires us to pause before rushing to judgment. To be brave enough to listen to things that are not easy to hear. To be patient enough to realize that sometimes, a difficult behavior is simply a silent cry for help from a soul struggling to survive. Collective healing begins with the smallest acts. Stopping the urge to impose expectations on others, learning to ask, "What happened to you?" instead of, "What's wrong with you?" It begins with acknowledging that everyone carries invisible battles that outsiders cannot see. And when we change the way we view wounds, from signs of weakness to parts of the growth journey, we are also healing ourselves. Because when we stop judging others, we learn to stop judging the wounded parts within our own hearts as well. In that understanding, the world not only becomes kinder, it becomes more authentic. A world where wounds do not have to be hidden. A world where healing is not about perfection, but about the courage to continue loving. To continue believing, even when scars still remain.